All right, this morning we're going to talk to you about properly getting your UAV or your drone ready for a mission, to go fly your mission. So what we did is we downloaded a commonly available checklist right off the internet. One thing we do want to say is not each checklist will match your drone specifically, so a good practice would be to add to it as you need to for your particular drone. Okay, so we're just going to go through some of the main areas of how we would get ready before we even take the drone out to the field, because we don't want to get 10 miles out and have forgotten some important aspect. Okay, so first thing we do is that before we even think about flying anywhere is prepare mission planning. Okay, big step in that is making sure our airports are notified if we're going to be interrupting any of those flight zones. Obviously making sure our location is approved for flight. And what's the app for that?
So AirMap. AirMap is a good app to use to check whether or not you have LANC availability in your area with your airport. If you're not near an airport and you're in Class G airspace, that's just a step that you don't have to take.
Right. Thank you. Then weather obviously is a big part of this, and before you can even look at what the weather is going to do, you have to understand what your drone capabilities are. Some drones can go all the way down to like minus 10 degrees, other drones cannot. Okay, so you have to know the operational limitations of your drone, how much wind can it handle. We have to know all that before we even think about going. Like today, obviously, is not a good day to fly. Firmware. Okay, there's firmware just like on your computer. These drones have constant updates that they need to be updated. We always need to be flying with the most current firmware. And some of our drones, like this one, has intelligent flight batteries that also need to match on firmware. So firmware is always a big thing.
Yeah, so one thing about that is each battery set, if you have multiple packs of batteries, just because you run the firmware update with the aircraft and one set of batteries in, you may have to rerun it with all of your batteries. So in our case for this aircraft, we've got about 9 sets of these batteries, and we'd have to run through that process 9 separate times for those updates.
So just like our apps on our phone, always updates. Okay, our micro SD card formatted and installed, ready.
This one actually does. So this one's a slightly inconvenient spot for it. But right on this side here is where the SD card goes for the aircraft. Again, with this specific aircraft, and yours may be different, this one's got a dual camera configuration, and depending on what camera we use, it may actually have an onboard SD card for that specific camera too.
Right. So, but definitely you'll have problems if that SD card's not where it's supposed to be.
Absolutely, and if pictures or video are your end goal, not going out to the field with the proper SD cards really sets you back.
Right. And as we have found out many times through trial and error, batteries, making sure you have fully charged batteries is always a good step before you travel out to the field.
Absolutely, and with these DJI intelligent flight batteries, they've just got a single button push on here, and it will light up to let me know exactly where it is as far as the battery level. So these are nice and convenient. Again, depending on your aircraft and the manufacturer, you might not have that ability. You may actually have to plug it into a balance charger to see exactly what level it's at.
And thinking about batteries, if you know you have a 2-hour mission to fly, you definitely want to make sure you have your battery sets available to cover that whole time. Typically, these will last 15 to 20 minutes.
Depending on the operations, these ones are actually 20 to 30 minutes, but depending on payload and things like that. But on average, you get somewhere between 10 and 25 minutes. A lot of the new popular, like the Mavic series, things like that, they're going up to 30 minutes.
Yeah, batteries are getting better. Then never neglect your controller, because we've also made this mistake out in the field. We've had our drone perfectly ready to go, and then we get out there and our critical ground controller there is low on batteries.
Yes, and so this controller, the way it's set up right now, it actually has removable rechargeable batteries. So we can have a couple different sets in the field with us, and again, simple button push to see exactly what the battery levels are at. With some of the other controllers, you don't have the ability to remove the battery, so making sure that you charge that while charging your batteries is always a good idea.
And of course, you'll see this one has its own tablet. But a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with off-the-shelf like a Phantom or something, you're typically using your cell phone or a little tablet for your controller, so make sure that it's also charged. Okay, so gimbal protector installed. Does
So this one doesn't have necessarily a gimbal protector. This one does have a lens cover, but if you get, again, like the Mavic Type Series, they come with a gimbal protector that just holds it in place.
Right.
With this one, it's not as necessary because we simply remove the camera itself and it travels in its own separate box.
All right, and then of course you want to make sure everything that you need for this particular drone is packed in your case, propellers, all that kind of stuff, and extra special tools you might need. Okay, so that's kind of our pre-deployment checklist. Then we move into our launch site checklist. Okay, again, we're verifying the weather is still good, especially when we're at the location, making sure our wind gusts aren't too high for what we're going to be trying to do. We're looking in the area we're at, we're looking for our obstacles, you know, is our launch zone close to trees, power lines, etc. And this is very important to understand when it comes to the return to home function. Okay, because most of these drones, when we launch them, they fly their pre-positioned path and they return to the starting point. Okay, we need to understand coming back to the starting point that it's at the right altitude to clear any obstacles that would be in the way. So that's a common mistake we see people make.
Absolutely, and if you do use the return to home function that's built into it in the case of an emergency or something like that, or you need to stop whatever it's doing and bring it back right away, understand that at least with DJI aircraft for sure, you can set the return to home function inside the what's called the DJI Go app. It's the app that you can control your aircraft from, but that sets its own parameters. So for instance, if I've got it flying at 100 feet, but I've got my return to home parameters set at 150 feet, as soon as I hit that button, the first thing that aircraft is going to do is going to go up 50 feet. So if we were clear at 100, but maybe we're not clear at 150, that could be a big issue for us. Another issue is indoor flight. I know some of the educators out there, they use gym spaces to fly. Making sure that the return to home on that is set to hover. So in an emergency situation or where it's going to crash, something like that, you hit return to home and it'll just hover in place. Because generally when you're inside a gym, your GPS signal is not going to be very good. So it might not be able to find you the way it normally would outside. So if you hit return to home, it might not actually come back to you. It may accelerate into a wall. And further, again, if you're used to flying outside at 100 feet, your local gym probably does not have a 100-foot ceiling. And it's a quick way to lose an aircraft.
Very good point on the indoors. Okay, so getting that down to the drone itself. We're actually at the mission field. We're preparing to launch the drone. We want to do an actual equipment check of our drone because gathering here, this is about a $15,000 drone, and one of our weak links is probably a $12 part. So we don't want this $12 part to cost us $30,000. So very important we do a good pre-flight inspection. So one of the first things we're going to look at is the airframe itself, the landing gear, and depending on the drone type, some have spring-loaded automatic deploying landing gear. This one doesn't. It looks like it's rigid landing gear, so that's pretty simple to inspect. We just want to make sure there's nothing loose.
Yep, so when it comes to the landing gear, make sure there's no cracks in it. There's nothing loose. It's nice and secure. Not going to fall off or anything like that. And again, everyone's different. Some of them are built in to where they're you can't mess with them at all. You can't remove them. With these ones, with a simple flick of this, I can pull it out. So making sure that it's properly seated and locked all the way down is very important. Make sure there's no pieces missing off the end. If they're misbalanced, if there's a chunk missing off one end, there's a chance that as we land, it could tip in that direction. So we just want to make sure that they're functional and in good working shape.
Yes. And then, of course, our propellers. We definitely want to have our propellers, make sure they're attached correctly and that they are oriented correctly.
Yes, so not only the orientation, we'll start with the physical properties itself. The propellers really, most of them are plastic and they're slightly rigid, but they're not too hard to damage. So you want to go through and you want to look for cracks or chips, particularly on the leading edge. So depending on the direction that it spins, the edge that goes forward first is going to have more of an effect maybe than stuff happening on the back end. But the way I see it is when you look at the cost of the aircraft versus the cost of propellers, if there's any issue with your propeller, go ahead and replace it. It's just not worth losing the aircraft over a couple $1 part. And then you talked about making sure that they're on in the right way. So if we take a look at the propellers, you can see that they're oriented in opposite directions. because the physics of flight on this aircraft says that if we have these two spinning in the same direction and these two spinning in the same but opposite direction, that gives us that stability as we're flying there. If you install these propellers wrong, these ones, they make it really obvious. If you install it wrong, you actually can't actually lock it down. So that's nice, but not all aircraft have that ability or come with that feature. So you just want to make sure that it sits solidly on your aircraft and it's mounted well on top of the physical properties of making sure that it's in good functioning shape.
Then, in addition, obviously, to the propellers, you want to make sure your motors do a good visual, maybe a shake check on your motors, because these are also, they can loosen up on you, so you want to kind of give them a spin, make sure they spin freely. There's no dirt or debris in them.
Absolutely, and one thing to keep in mind as you're going through this pre-flight, this is not a visual inspection. It needs to be visual and tactile. You've got to touch, feel, shake. If you're not putting hands on your aircraft, you're probably going to miss something. So it's always a good idea to verify it by actually grabbing it, shaking it, moving it, those type of steps.
Definitely. Then, of course, making sure our tablet and our remote control are connected and they actually function together. We do sometimes run into issues with our little connector cables going from our remote up to our tablet.
Absolutely, and especially again as you look at the Mavic series, and I keep bringing this one up because it's it's fairly common, but it comes with a small connector that's built into the remote, and it is one of the main failure points of that system. So we actually recommend that you don't use the built-in cable with that one. You use your actual phone charger or tablet charger cable.
Then, of course, which we've already looked at, the SD card being installed. That would be a quick pre-flight thing also. Then make sure our batteries are installed and take note of our voltages, making sure we have a good full charge for the mission we're going to need.
So with these ones, they just slide into the back, and again, it'll be different depending on what system you have. And just to be safe here where we are, I mean, we're not going to take off at all, and I don't see any issues off the top of my head, but just to be safe, since we are indoors, I am going to remove the propellers, and it's always a good step, especially if you're working with students. Don't put propellers on until it is time to actually fly, because you'll seem to always want to get that person who wants to maybe start things up before they're supposed to.
Oh yeah. And that's kind of our general rule in general, is the prop should never be on until you're exactly ready to fly.
And again, depending on what setup you have, as you mentioned, checking batteries, this controller actually has an LCD screen built into the controller aspect of it, and it actually tells me what my battery percentage is for both the controller and the aircraft itself. It may be something that you have to do on your tablet. So in this case, I can go in here and bring up the actual cell voltage of all my batteries. And so it tells me all the different cells in my battery, what the temperature is, what percentage they're at. If you're using multiple batteries on the same aircraft, you want to make sure that they're very, very close with voltage. Otherwise, you may see some issues there. And in fact, this specific system has a built-in check that if my battery voltage is too far off, it's not going to allow me to take off.
Then at this time, it would also be good, one of our last steps before we would pack it up to go out to the field would be to take our lens cap covers off and stuff and make sure we have good video while we're in here.
Absolutely. No. So not only that, but making sure that you have some lens wipes with you. When you're going out and with the intention of taking video or photos, having a good clean lens is really going to make your life a whole lot easier. So.
And this is kind of concludes what we would do before we pack it up in our case and take it out to the field. But at this point, we know we have a good working operating drone. It's got good batteries. It has everything it needs to have a productive mission. We've checked our weather. Now we're going to head out to the field and do an actual launch sequence and with our spotters and everything.